Thank you all for coming. Appreciate everyone taking the time to come and to our third in a series on academic freedom. I'm Ronnie Schreiber. I am the interim dean of the College of Arts and Letters, here to welcome you. And I want to thank our former dean, Monica Casper, who's here, who helped support this series. And much, much thanks to Professor Jonathan Grobart, who has been tirelessly organizing and putting everything together. Series. So Jonathan will introduce our speakers. We have Professors Jennifer Ruth and Professor Johnny Williams, and he'll talk a little bit more about that. I just want to say that it's so wonderful to have this series here because we hear about academic freedom all the time. You as students probably hear about it. And what's nice about the series is recognizing that it's not a static concept, but instead something that really needs to be understood in a contextual manner and through robust debate. So that's what we're hoping for here as well. And I'll turn it over to Jonathan Grobart. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you to both our outgoing dean, Dean Monica Casper, and our incoming dean, Dean Ronnie Schreiber. Right. So this is the third of our events. Before we get started, I want to plug a couple of other events. So one is right after this event. Some of us might head over to the other side of campus to see a film screening sponsored by one of my departments, International Security Conflict Resolution. It's on the Nakba. It's called Creation and Catastrophe, about what happened with the creation of Israel in 1948. That will be the screening and then discussion, roughly 5 to about 7:15 at the Aztec Union Theater. And the topic is relevant, broadly speaking, to the event on academic freedom, as it's a type of event that some partisans for Israel have tried to implicate as illegitimate for questioning Israel's creation. And then a plug for another event that I'm involved in as part of being involved in the Presidential Task Force on Anti-Semitism. Kenneth Stern, who has a recent book called The Conflict Over the Conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian Campus Debates. He was to my delight. I was pushing for the task force to invite him to kind of think more broadly about these issues and across our ideological spectrum. Other members of the anti-Semitism task force agreed with me. He's also very interested in academic freedom and free expression. And one of the things he argues is that in a robust discussion, nothing should be ruled off limit. You know, you could think about on the one side, arguments that Israel's creation was illegitimate, and on the other side, arguments that the need of a Jewish nation state justified the denial of Palestinian claims and their displacement. So the sense that all things should be open for discussion. And as some of you know, I've had a long involvement with Israel-Palestine on college campuses as a dissenting Jew, and it's made me wary of efforts to limit speech or to limit the scope of academic freedom. I worry that focusing on the impact over intent worries me, as does appeals to just defer to the affected community on what constitutes an acceptable prejudice. So in a way, that's where I'm coming with it, like my concerns about academic freedom and limitations, and that will be implicit in today's discussion. So with that tease, very excited about today's events. We have an interesting juxtaposition. Jennifer Ruth, professor of film studies, longtime expert activist on academic freedom, and Johnny Eric Williams, professor of sociology and race, and expert on, among other things, the broader ideology of white supremacy. Jennifer's latest co-authored book, which I just got autographed, It's Not Free Speech, Race, Democracy, and the Future of Academic Freedom, makes a case for removing white supremacy from the scope of academic freedom, and more broadly calls for a reconceptualization and ultimately an invigoration of academic freedom. Jennifer will go into the details later. Johnny has been both a victim of attacks on academic freedom, abetted by the university leadership, and then a protagonist on how to assess the state of actually existing academic freedom and what is to be done. It would seem to me that his own experience provides a cautionary tale of what can happen in practice when license is given to remove arguably racist expression from the scope of academic freedom. you may take out some white supremacists, but you're also likely to take out those from most marginalized groups, particularly when there's a mob out there ready to seize on those people and they have deep pockets on who to target. So with that said, this is meant to be more of a discussion, but the first part will be introducing our two speakers to you. So this is overview, and we're starting with Jody. And the broad questions that I'll ask Jody to talk about is, first, what happened to you with the social media post in 2017 and 2019? How did the Trinity administration respond? And then you'll follow up on the substance of your points, explaining your work on critical sociology and the focus on white supremacist, hetero-patriarchal capitalism, and basically summarizing your thesis. So it's an open-ended one to just introduce yourself to us.
All right. Hello, everyone. I want to thank the deans, Casper and Driver, for bringing me here, and for Professor Garber to have this conversation today. I think it's important because I think that for me as a scholar who has been, and listen to my words carefully, a blackened individual, other folks have been whitened, right? So there is no white or black, that's just human race, that's the human beings. I approach it that way, but as a blackened scholar in this academy, which is, from my point of view, fundamentally anti-Black to its core, and it's a mechanism by which the system of white supremacy capitalism operates. It's one of those avenues. The academy itself is that we need to evaluate what we mean by this term academic freedom, where it came from, which was around the turn of the 20th century. And there was this famous sociologist by the name of Thurston Veblen, who was pretty radical because he started to question the way the university is organized with board of trustees. That is, business people, what Marx calls the bourgeoisie, right? Capitalists. They were trying to make sure that they could, at least from his perspective, weed out people who would question the way the United States is organized along these white supremacist capitalist ways. And so as a result, he never was able to find a tenured position in the Academy of the United States, right? So I'm coming from that position, knowing that history. So academic freedom for whom is an issue that I'm concerned with. Now, to get to the substance of the question, what happened in 2017, it was June 18, 2017. Etched in my memory, right? Well, it really was the next day, because I received a call from one of the associate deans of faculty at my college to tell me that Trinity's switchboard was being lit up by people calling in bomb threats and threats to kill me and my family and everything else. So this was a result of what I wrote. It was a result of what happened to this fellow. Hopefully you guys are old enough to remember this. Some of y'all are. Yeah, right. But Philando Castile in Minneapolis, he told the police officer he had a weapon and he was registered with a weapon. And he was reaching for his glove compartment and the cop shot him like multiple times and killed him in front of his wife, and his kid was in the back of the car too. So that's one. I was incensed with the fact that the officer who did that was basically let off and given money to leave. All right. On that very night of June 18th, when I wrote this tweet, I was in the room with my daughter. She was young, and I was like, the world's got to be a better place than this. Ever since I've been alive, the cops have been killing us left and right with no accountability. And if you want data for that, you can see that just last week, the Washington Post and the Guardian published a piece talking about how there's more killings of Black people now than there were before the movement for Black Lives. So it never stops. And now we have Tyree, who is gone because of the Black cops that did what they did to him. And we can talk about that further too, and why it is that it's racist, even though they're Black, right? It's complicated. right? White supremacy is. But anyway, that very night also, there was a report out of Seattle, Washington, on the left coast, that Charlene Allows had called the police because she thought that there was an intruder, and she had 4 kids inside, and there was 1 kid who was in her stomach, right? And she came outside to greet the police who came, and she had a knife in her hand, and the cop shot her dead with the kids in the house. So I was incensed, right? And I wrote this tweet, post 1, which I posted to Facebook and Twitter. It's past time for the racially oppressed to do what people who believe themselves to be white will not do. Put an end to the vectors of their destructive mythology of whiteness and their white supremacy system. And I used a hashtag to be on a conversation with a fellow who wrote a piece called Let Them Fucking Die. And he went by the name of Son of Baldwin, but I know his real name. I won't say it here. And he wrote a piece in Medium that was titled Let Them Fucking Die, right? But that was mistaken for me having written it. But I was using the hashtag on Twitter just to be on the conversation. But anyway, then post 2, I said, I'm fed the fuck up with self-identified whites' daily violence directed at immigrants, Muslims, and sexually and racially oppressed people. The time is now to confront these inhuman assholes and end this now, right? So what I wrote was, done out of anger, sure. But what I wrote was consistent with history, with academic research, right, about the workings and violent dehumanizing that white supremacy capitalism is about. It's what my friend Ronaldo Walcott calls a zone of Black death. The United States is that. It's a zone of Black and indigenous death because of this kind of white supremacy capitalism. You take the land, you kidnap people and bring them over, you treat them as commodities and still continue to dehumanize them and so forth, not giving them full citizenship and stuff. So that's the subject of what I wrote. Now, the response, as I told you, was it was a mob scene on Twitter, on Facebook. People were inboxing me, making threats, all kinds of heinous things. You can see the body of work. You can find it on YouTube, all this stuff. But they're still out there. And I got this one fellow who actually attended Trinity College who, there's actually 2 now on Fox News, Jesse Waters and this guy, Tucker Carlson. Both of them are idiots. Okay. I don't know why Trinity gave him a degree, but hey, it's about the, most people think that the college is, it is for rich people. Okay. It's a liberal arts school in the Northeast in Connecticut. That's, it's like the 0.01%, right? It's not even 1%, it's the 0.01%. Tuition alone is close to $90,000, right? Most Americans can't afford that. So, but you got these 2 idiots who basically, especially Tucker Carlson, going on this show, ripping up this vitriol because he founded the Daily something, I can't remember the name of it. Yeah, the Daily Caller, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of like my colleague Isaac Kamala wrote about these connections and how they have this network of media that they could use, the Washington Times, the Daily Stormer, which is back online now. All these kinds of things to fester this stuff, and they give people your number, your email, right? Even they dox me, they call my house. Okay. My wife was scared shitless, right? But hey, my position was if they tell you that they're coming, they're not coming. It's the ones that don't come that you should be afraid of. But anyway, but they said I fled the campus. That's what the local newspaper said. It was summertime. I wasn't even damn campus. So, I don't know. Anyway, that's another story. All right. But the university president was issuing statements that were very problematic. And what I did was, Jonathan, I don't know, should I answer all these questions?
Oh, just as much as you want.
Oh, okay.
To,
All right.
Yeah.
So I decided that I need to get a lawyer. I just called the lawyer my mouthpiece. And I got a very pricey lawyer who Trinity was very, very afraid of because he had sued them twice successfully. And I had a very good case, he told me. And he told me not to say anything, right? But I did write a public statement, January 21st, for which I think I should read to you all. And I'll read it now. So for the entirety of my adult life, I've worked to inform my students, colleagues, and the public about the dire and destructive character of oppression, and worked to push all of us towards making the world a more just, equitable, and humane place. The recent displays of hate and explicit death threats I've received via email and telephone in response to my recent post are par for the course in the work that I do, but this attack is at a level of vitriol and hatred excessive of what I have ever experienced. This response seems to be a concerted campaign to attack not just what they think I said in my post, but to attack my integrity, scholarship, teaching department in college. The publicity it is receiving it also seems to be an organized warning to all others who want to speak out. This seems to be a national drive of intimidation to professors, which all colleges and universities should be concerned about. It is evident to anyone who carefully reads my post on Facebook and Twitter that I did not call for the death of self-identified whites. I merely attached a hashtag to my post derived from a long blog article written by the son of Baldwin entitled, "Let Them All Fucking Die." This was admittedly a provocative move to get readers to pay attention to my reasonable, and yes, angry argument. I posted my comments on social media to draw attention of the readers to the current dire state of white supremacy in the nation. We can debate whether social media has expanded, contracted, or perverted the public sphere. We all know that anonymity and the lack of face-to-face accountability makes meanness and ad hominem attacks easy to do. And I said, I do not, and I did not, and I do not use media in this way. My detractors have. And I stopped with that, right? And the response of the university was, especially the president, I will name her, Joanne Berger Sweeney. She's still the president of Trinity College. Because Campus Reform did a story of my tweets. Okay. Yeah. And so the president started to respond to it in a way she felt the pressure, as Jonathan was talking about. She issued a statement saying that she called for the dean of faculty to review me in this incident. And she said that she wanted to see if any college policies or procedures were violated. Right? Now, I know damn well that I didn't violate any college procedure on my own social media account. It had nothing to do with Trinity College. But she then said his use of, that is my use of, hashtag was reprehensible. And at the very least, in poor judgment. No matter its intent, she said, it goes against our fundamental values. This is DEI bullshit. Fundamental values as an institution, and I believe its effect is to close minds rather than to open them. Little did she know she was dead damn wrong, right? But and the proof is in the pudding. Okay, so that's the first response. Okay, now you asked me the second part about the second incident. I refuse to cede social media to the crazies. Social media is a classroom for me, right? It is a part of academic freedom, right? I don't know what the hell free expression is, but I do know what academic freedom is, right? And you all should know that in the state of Connecticut, not only does the First Amendment apply to the public sector, but it also applies to the private sector. It's one of the only states that does that. Okay, so that's that's the uniqueness of mine. So I had them, had them by advice. So, and I knew that, and that was okay. So I did a second tweet in 2019 because I had these alumni who wanted to scour just like, the Tucker Carlson types. I kept my social media accounts open because I want to help everybody having a say and have a conversation. So these alumni, they call themselves the Alumni for a Better Trinity College, meaning without Black people, all right? I wrote many months before that whiteness is terrorism, right? Whiteness is terrorism. First of all, these people don't know what I mean by whiteness, but, I was trying to get the conversation going about that topic and what is terrorism and why is it terrorism? All I can tell you is that every day, Black, Latino, and Indigenous individuals are terrorized in the United States, consistently terrorized with lack of employment, housing, health, right? Premature death, extrajudicial killings, on and on and on. So all of this, right? So these guys scoured my social media account, and they also found that I said this. And clearly they don't understand social, I'm a white supremacist scholar. So I know what I'm talking about, right? That's what academic freedom is. I'm an expert in the field. I said all self-identified white people, no exceptions, right, are invested in and collude with systemic white racism, what we know as white supremacy, right? Then I said, less brazenly, because I'm talking about in a more brazen, well, it wasn't so brazen, but I was just talking about, some of you might be fans and stuff, Barry and Michelle Obama, right? And I call them Negroes, not with an N, Kneegrows, Negroes. They're on their knees, they're begging, they're groveling, they do the bidding of whiteness and white supremacy capitalism, and they kill Black people, right? And Obama is the worst president for doing that to Black people. Black people got nothing from him, right? You can argue with me about it if you want to, but hey, you're going to lose. I can turn to the policy. And the reason why I said that is that Black and bourgeoisie compradors, and that means people who are collaborators, right, are predisposed to betray everyday Black and people's sacrifices and aspirations for their own bloody material benefit, right? And some Blackened people can be whiter than whitened people. And that's Frantz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth, Black skin, white mass. The killing of us by these courtiers is continuous. You can see it daily. They're in the Congress. Hakeem Jeffries, one of them, okay? So the response to that, what the president do? Well, because I had been successful resisting the first time around, she championed it down. In the college, I actually had the dean of the faculty at that time, the acting interim dean of the faculty, come to my office and to tell me about this particular incident, which I had no idea about till she told me. And she said, we just want you to know that the college supports you. We understood what you said, right? So they changed their demeanor this time around, and they issued this statement. Trinity College supports academic freedom and free expression and inquiry. Again, I don't know what free expression means, but which are hallmarks of academia in a democratic society. When speech proves controversial, our responsibility as educators is to promote more debate and discussion, not less. Twitter is a challenging place for a thoughtful discussion, which is clear from this example. Okay. Well, challenging to who? They don't want to have the conversation at all, right? So those are the two kinds of ways in which the president of Trinity College responded to that. Yeah. You tell me if you want me to stop, because I can continue to go on. Now, the other question was.
Well, you've kind of done the thesis of your article. Actually, it's probably good to elaborate a little bit on what do you mean by white supremacist. It's a mouthful. White supremacist, heteropatriarchal capitalism. You're getting to it, but can you explain it maybe succinctly?
This is a term that evolved from when I was in university, grad school. This bridge caught my back. is a book that we all read by Changra. I can't pronounce her last name, but This Bridge Called My Back. Another book that came out, there was a statement before that, the Kambuhi River Collective Statement, right? Where they were talking about interlocking oppressions, not this intersectionality watered down bull that they're talking about today, but interlocking oppression. Use the word oppression. These are systems of oppression. And what they said is that Black women, Indigenous women, Latin women are suffering from not just being women, right, a woman, right, but from also from class oppression, from racial oppression, right, and then sexuality, right, these kinds of oppression. So what I'm looking at is not only patriarchy, right, but you can't understand, when you think about capitalism, you can't understand capitalism without taking into account that capitalism depends upon the differentiation of human beings for exploitative and domination purposes. It needs to differentiate people. It is to put them in categories which they made up called race. Race is not real, but racism is very real because it's the practice of the belief that races exist. Okay? This is a concern that I had and what it is that I do. So you can't be like, maybe some of the students, I don't know if they know what whack-a-mole is, but when these things pop up and like that, you just got to let them all pop at the same time and cut their heads off. Exactly, because if you keep fighting one, you're doing it in isolation and you will never get rid of the oppression, right? And so the Black radical feminists of the 1970s and 80s were good at laying out the interpretive frame for how it is that we must get rid of this thing called capitalism, which Cedric Robinson called racial capitalism, which I just call white supremacy, heteropatriarchal capitalism, which Bell Hooks used, right? Okay. All right. So that's where that comes from. Now, if you want to know about critical sociologists, there's not that many critical sociologists. Okay. Critical sociology is about using the knowledge that we have acquired through this educational process, right, to raise consciousness levels, not just people who are oppressed, but the people who are doing the oppressing, right, to raise the consciousness of those folks in order to change the situation. So it's about taking on an active position. It's out of the tradition of the Black radical tradition, right, which Cedric Robinson also talks about. And the Black radical tradition was really started at the moment that they enslaved us, that is, the Europeans enslaved us and brought us to this territory in the Americas, throughout the Americas, not just North America, but South America, Central America, Caribbean too. And so a critical sociologist is about creating that collective consciousness and that information and knowledge in collaboration with the people to make the changes that are necessary to create a new world, right? To get rid of what these institutions are doing now. That's what we do, right? But again, I tell you that there's not that many, right? I'll put it this way. I'll give you this analogy. This colleague of mine who's on Twitter, it goes by the hashtag at public archive _ before the archive. He said that academics have no relations to intellectuals, right? And then activists, just as activists, have no relation to revolutionary, right? That's what I'm trying to get you to see that. The job of an academic is to be conformist and to subdue change. I'm not an academic. I'm an intellectual, and I'm a part of the Black radical tradition, which is an intellectual is about creative change and changing society, actually doing the work with the people and working together to make that possible, because the people know a lot, not just people with degrees, right? You can talk to Fannie Lou Hamer, if y'all know who she is, right? You can go talk to Ella Baker, right? You can talk to Harriet Tubman or Sojourner Truth. These people knew things and how to make a better world. So that's what we do as a critical sociologist. Now, the other question was about my thesis, the paper. Yeah. Okay. All right. Then I end with that. So
okay, good. Okay.
Can talk. Okay. This particular piece that I wrote called Academic Freedom, Double Standard, Freedom for Courtiers, Suppression for Critical Scholars. The main thesis of it is that academic freedom is contingent, okay? The people whose academic freedom is protected are the people who carry the water of white supremacy, heteropatriarchal capitalism, right? These are the people who validated and helped to perpetuate it in these institutions, these universities, right? People who challenge that don't have academic freedom. I learned that, right? I mean, they could have fired me, right? And they would have paid dearly, but they could have fired me. All I have to do is look at Stephen Saletta at University of Illinois. It's exactly what they did to him, even though he was straight on with his criticism of Israel, right? Yet they fired him because they said, oh, we can't be talking about Israel, and they equate Israel with Jews only, right? This is supposed to be a secular state, right? But the thing is that with that piece, I then go on to tell you that the people who are most vulnerable for not having academic freedom are Black people, right? Muslims, people with certain religions, right? Political positions that are contrary to the establishment. You are vulnerable to being denied a job. And the fact is that we know, and I think it was Bertrand Russell who wrote this. I can't remember exactly, but he did a secretarial piece about tenure. Even tenure itself, I mean, you don't need to worry about radicals anymore because tenure is pretty much guaranteeing that the radicals will be weeded out before they're given access to stability, according to Bertrand Russell. So, I mean, this is the reality of the situation. So my piece in the Journal of Academic Freedom sought to lay that out and to get people to tell our colleagues not to be so afraid to challenge power. I mean, they have just as much power as you're willing to give them, right? Power doesn't run from the top down, y'all. They run from the bottom up. So you students in here, you can rebel in them at any moment. Just ask anybody from the 60s. They're still around, I think, right? Right? And they just took over Berkeley and stuff like that. Students say, I ain't getting that education no more. I don't like that, right? You can do the same thing because you have the power. You have the numbers too. The key is to get them out of your head, to free yourself, as Bob Marley said, from mental slavery and not be afraid. And just know we all gonna die anyway. Some may go sooner, but others will go later. But we gonna die. So live for that idea. Okay. I'm done.
Okay. Turning to Jennifer. So yeah, two of the big introductory questions is what inspired you and Michael Berube to write the book, It's Not Free Speech, Race, Democracy, and the Future of Academic Freedom. What are the central arguments of the book? And am I correct to characterize it as there's kind of two big things going on? One is a concrete proposal to prohibit outright white supremacism from the scope of academic freedom, but more broadly to reconceive how to think about academic freedom. Morris, I'm not quite getting it, and feel free to clarify.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Okay,
and, wrote this. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be able to share this with Johnny because there is a way in which his piece really did inspire me because I was working on the ground. Well, let me just back up and also say thank you for the question about what inspired the book, because I have not been able to say that to anyone. And it really is the heart of it. And the first book that Michael and I wrote together came out of my experience as chairing the English department at Portland State and trying to fight the administration, trying to force us to any kind of new initiative had to come with contingent faculty. And then we'll give you we'll give you a tenure line later if it worked out. Oh, it's just that the English departments are notorious, right? We're the worst for just all the composition people. Anyways,
yeah.
I fought that very, very hard, myself and a few others, and was kind of stunned by the resistance we got from tenure faculty who claimed to be 100% on board with what we were doing. So our first book came out of that. The second book also came out of stuff from the ground, which was that I was the union chapter's vice president for academic freedom and grievances, is what we call it. The PS, Portland State American Association of University Professors Labor Union chapter. And we're a collective bargaining chapter. I was the vice president, and so I was dealing with grievances and things like that. And I also went with faculty who were under investigation. So for 3 years, I went with faculty who were under investigation to what we call the Office of Global Diversity and Inclusion. And so I was the faculty steward and the person just to help them navigate these very onerous investigations where you have to show, student complaints about harm in some way, discrimination in some way. And at the time when I started, the bar for launching an investigation was incredibly low. I mean, since then we've negotiated more and the bar is a little bit higher. The bar was very low, and I understand why. I mean, a lot of the lawyers who work for these offices come out of civil rights work, and then they end up, and I became quite close to a few of them. And what was fascinating to watch was the way they end up doing things that they never thought they would do. For example, I went with someone who was around the time of, I'm not sure who died, what police brutality situation it was, but it was he's now the chair of the Black Studies Department at the Race School of Gender, Ethnic, and Gender Relations in our university. Anyway, he was under investigation by a white student, and I started to realize that these are disproportionately not white, cisgendered, tenured men who are brought into these investigations, which is what I think we typically think. We think of sexual harassment and stuff. They were, and I said, we actually did a data request and said, who are the people, what in terms of sexuality, in terms of race, et cetera, who are the people who are, and in terms of rank, in terms of if you're a contingent faculty, non-tenured full-time faculty, or tenured faculty, who's being investigated here? And it was disproportionate. It was disproportionate people of color and women, and it was also disproportionate women on non-tenured tracks who had bigger course loads. So anyway, that was a very interesting experience. And around that same time, we had two provocateurs on campus. One, it says since left. I don't know if you've heard of, and God help me, because if I say this and this is recorded, I mean, I've got so much "you are unfuckably hideous" stuff from this man's followers, and I'm sure I'll get more. But Peter Boghossian and Bruce Gilley. Peter Boghossian has since left, flaming out that he can't. He was never disciplined. In fact, the union. I hope I'm not saying too much that's going to get me in trouble, but the union empowered that monster because our previous executive director would fight him for free speech. And all of these contexts, he would go to a university studies department, a gender studies department talk or whatever, and he would film people, and then they would complain, and then he would take things out of context. He would forward emails from within department. So this question of having a bully on campus who's weaponizing free speech. At the same time, we have this guy, Bruce Gilley, who literally calls himself a pro-colonialist professor. And he's part of this Western chauvinist and he wrote something about how, and he just recently tweeted, oh, it's interesting, what we need to talk about with the, there was the Black Republican congressperson who was sort of holding the Democrats to task. Anyway, he tweeted something about, this might be a good moment to look at why the Back to Africa didn't have much of an uptick. It's just incredible. So he is untouchable. Meanwhile, I'm going with people to the OGDI office and they're getting sanctioned. I'm going with white, well-meaning people who blunder. It's not all chair of Black studies. It's not all. I'm going with white, well-meaning people who blunder, but who are absolutely fine with saying, okay, I'm gonna start to learn how to deal with the pronoun they. Right? Mm-hmm. I'm gonna learn how. They're open to it, right? Or they didn't mean to make a mistake, or they didn't understand something. They're getting sanctioned by the university. They're getting sanctioned. They're getting things in their files. Bruce Gilley is untouchable. Why? Because of the deep pockets of the conservative, because of campus reform, because of this whole machinery that's out there. He's saying things that I'm going with people who are getting sanctioned. He's saying he is actually racist. He's actually and nothing's happening to him. And so when Johnny has a line about the double standard, and it was like crystal clear to me, like, we have a profound double standard going on here. And then we had someone killed, Jason Washington, on our campus by police. And we had a rally, and this is around the same time as George Floyd's murder. And we had a rally, and I was at the rally, and one of our faculty was speaking to police brutality, speaking about Jason Washington's death. And he's called out PSU AAUP, my union chapter, for tolerating this pro-colonial platform professor. So the president of the union is a man named Jose Padin, and I'm the vice president. And we're friends with the person who's calling the union out on this. And we're like, we don't sanction Gilley. We don't have anything. Gilley doesn't use our services. Our executive director did really embolden Bogosian. The executive director is now gone. We organized to get rid of him, and that was a really hard work. But meanwhile, we're like, why are we being held accountable for Gilley and not faculty senate, not the university president, et cetera? So we're actually friends with this person. We asked him, and he says, well, I've already gone to the president, and they're not going to do anything. I've already gone to the presiding officer of faculty senate, and they're not going to do anything. And so at first I was sort of like, well, why the labor union? And then I thought, you know what? It's a really good question, because AUP, first and foremost, is not a labor union. I don't know if you guys know anything about it. There are more students here, so I should explain. It's the American Association of University Professors, and it's what Johnny was talking about in terms of what came into being at the turn of the century to try to protect faculty's academic freedom from corporate influence, political influence, et cetera. And it's great. It's the organization that came up with tenure, which I very much champion because it does create a space of relative disinterestedness and protection from interference. But so it's a great organization, but it's a little bit, but it was started by a group of white men, and it's slow moving, and it's tended to want to try and embrace all professors, right? It has to be this sort of big umbrella organization. But it is, if there's any organization, unfortunately right now, FIRE seems to get, there's these different organizations that are coming around that are getting a lot more attention and are getting quoted in articles around academic freedom. And I'm disheartened to see that AUP is not getting quoted in these articles about academic freedom, but AUP is actually the place that created the infrastructure for academic freedom, the policies, and a place where you can distinguish academic freedom from just free speech and First Amendment. But it has its problems. But so I was thinking, well, our friend has a point, because Gilley and Bogosian and all of these types across the country, and of course we got criticism for don't draw attention to someone who just wants oxygen, right? That's a big issue in dealing with this stuff, is that you're actually going to increase their followers, et cetera. I'm sorry, but John Eastman, Chris Rufo is a hack who will probably be, if Ron DeSantis is the president, the next Secretary of Education. So you cannot take these clowns, you cannot pretend like you can't ignore the clowns. The clowns are here, and they're winning to some extent right now. So we decided that what we are going to do, if faculty senate's not going to do anything, president's going to do anything, there is a way in which, if we're AAUP, we're not just a labor union, we also speak for academic freedom. And this guy, maybe free speech, maybe he can call free speech what he does. He can't say that it's protected by academic freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't pretend that, you can't just ignore 50 years of research. He tweets things like, I don't know, he tweets things like the only thing that the Belgians should apologize for, Belgian Congo, Timid, is the fact that they didn't assassinate Patrice Lumumba sooner. That's the kind of thing he tweets. So basically, we kind of made it our thing. So this is why this is actually what inspired the book, is that I realized what does academic freedom protect and what does it not protect? And it can't devolve into a libertarian, both sidesism kind of thing for fear of it getting gamed. I'll come back to that, for fear of it getting gamed. Meanwhile, so we actually put out, it was a really intense organizing movement. I'm really proud of it. We did not put it to a vote to the members, to Portland State, but we put out a statement of censure of Gilly. And we said, we do not, because we knew that he was going to use academic freedom and he's looking for a court case, he's looking for a fight in every possible way. And we knew he was already using the phrase academic freedom in the same way that the right is weaponized free speech, right? And we wanted to say, no, academic freedom should not protect the kinds of ignorant work. Because mind you, when I say ignorant, I mean that he literally is, he quit Kipling, but doesn't know any of the modern research on the Namibia people in Africa or he doesn't read the contemporary historians. He's a third-rate political scientist who's now a culture war grifter. That's what he is. And his work does not have any kind of academic value. It does not. And so, but he's tenured. He's fully tenured. So how do you so the double standard became very clear to me. But to go back a little bit, so we issued a statement of censure just to create some language that says, and we did our homework. We researched what people working on post-colonial, and more recent work working on, and the people that we talked to were like, no, the people in his field, right? That's the key thing, right? The people in his field said, no, it's bullshit. Most of them also though said, but don't give them oxygen. But I was tired of the double standard. I mean, I was going with people to these investigations. So, and also I'm tired of the don't give them oxygen because that's not succeeding in any way. That's not helping. So anyway, we did a statement of censure. Meanwhile, I sit on the National AAUP Committee A for Academic Freedom. And I was very, very nervous that our local chapter was going to make this statement. And the national organization was actually going to maybe throw us under the bus a little, because we did not get campus reform. I got calls from campus reform that I ignored and stuff. And I don't do social media, so I'm very lucky that way. I'm very lucky that way. So we were worried that the right-wing machinery was going to go to town around our statement of censure. And we did get tons of emails, and we got people in our local chapter who then got out of the union. Said, forget my membership. I'm no longer a member of this union because you have no business censoring Bruce Gilly. We also got people who said, thank you, I'm now going to pay dues. So, and I would say that 2-to-1, and again, I'm at a particular place, Portland State, very, institutions are so uneven, and but the 2-to-1 was pro the statement. But meanwhile, I'm quite nervous that National AAUP is going to get into trouble, and I sit on Committee A, and it's just not going to be good. So I bring it to Committee A. I say to Robert Post, Yale law scholar, all of these all of these eminent historians and scholars. And I say, I was just so flattered when I was asked to be on this committee. I couldn't believe it. All of these eminent people who know academic freedom. And I just ask a simple question. I say, I don't tell them what we're doing on our local chapter. That's not how the committee works. But I'd say, does academic freedom protect pro-colonialism? Does it protect slavery apologetics? Why, if our classic example is that a German historian of Germany, who's a Holocaust denial or minimizer, is unfit, why don't we say that about other things? Why is it only something that happened in Europe instead of something that happened in America, like slavery? Or is there a double standard again? And it absolutely stumped the committee. And it didn't go anywhere with the National AAUP. That's why we wrote the book, because I had to come up with a way to say it does not protect pro-colonialism. And I had to find a way to argue with these people who really didn't want to argue this. Okay, so that's what inspired the book. And Michael writes a lot faster than I do. He thinks a lot faster than I do. So he and I had already been thinking about writing a second book about contingency issues, which is a massive, massive issue, right? And it has a lot to do with chilling speech. You know, people are not going to speak up if they're just simply, a student can complain and they just don't get rehired the next term. So we're starting to work on a second book about that issue when I was doing all this work around on my chapter. And he said, let's write about this. And thank God. And then it was a really, really steep learning curve to, for example, Charles Mills. I didn't know Charles Mills' work really until I realized I needed his work to write stuff about how abstract ideals are not okay when you have history of oppression that you have to take into account. We're academic. Well, you're not. You're intellectual. We're history and actual context and not some sort of abstraction. We can see what's happening with abstractions right now with the conservatives using the 14th Amendment for colorblindness in terms of racism against white people, right? So we can't traffic in abstractions anymore. So steep learning curve. All of this, by the way, is before the bills start passing in states across the country to ban critical race theory. Literally, as we're finishing the book, the critical race theory stuff takes off. And within a month, people who've never heard of critical race theory are now talking about it, and obviously don't know anything about it. So we've basically finished the book before that happened, and before Trump issued that executive order in January that then Chris Rufo helped metastasize across the country after Trump was no longer in office. So we basically wrote it before then. But I'm very pleased to say that here's the thing. Very pleased to say that I stand with. So we're looking at the white supremacy within academic institutions, within higher ed, and the double standard there in the book. We were not thinking about states interfering in universities, but I hadn't looked at the book in a while. And on the plane ride here, trying to remember what we said about certain things that Jonathan was asking about, I started to reread the book. And I was very happy to see this. Ultimately, judgments about the place of white supremacy in the United States go far beyond any one racist professor or even one school of thought populated by legions of racist professors. They go to the very self-definition of America and the degree to which many Americans remain unwilling to acknowledge the nation's implication in white supremacy, as evidenced, as we noted in the previous chapter, by the fierce backlash against the 1619 Project's claims that slavery was central to that self-definition. But the American legacy of white supremacism was, or should have been, undeniable all along. It is the force behind, and there we should throw in profit. Capitalism is the motivating force to create the conception of race. It is the motive force behind the ethnic cleansing of the native populations, the creation of the system of chattel slavery, and the century-long maintenance of Jim Crow. We fail to understand how this proposition can legitimately be understood as controversial. So we're saying that before DeSantis, before the AP African American Studies controversy, and we're saying that there is decades of scholarship now that make this incontrovertible if you have any kind of standards of academic rigor, and if you have any willingness to discern between speech that can be backed up by evidence versus free speech just sort of floating out there. And so here's the thing. I think a lot of people, we've been very attacked by conservatives, which is expected. But one thing that worries me is the degree to which we really wanted to reach sort of centrist white liberals because who were being divided down the middle around this issue of free speech, in the fact that, well, we don't deal with free speech, we deal with academic freedom. But we felt like there was much too much confusion, and it served the conservatives to conflate free speech and academic freedom. There's much too confusion among faculty about what academic freedom is versus what free speech is. And so, but the thing that I want to point out that concerns me about some of the criticisms is that we do not come up with this. What we end up proposing is in many ways quite conventional. It's not 100% conventional because there's some rethinking around academic freedom around the common good as a multiracial, multicultural democracy, not as just truth or common good or whatever. But so we did a little bit of rethinking, but our fundamental proposal addresses the fact that right now, these controversies that are popping up everywhere are not being handled by peers in the area. If there had been a panel, if Trinity had put a panel together of Johnny's peers in Black studies, African studies, sociology, whatever, and deferred to them before they said anything, it would it would be a different story. So what we're not calling for, to me, what's been so shocking, like I'm just classic white left liberal in terms of like shocked by George Floyd murder, shocked by Ron DeSantis, shocked. I continue, but to me, it's just astonishing that we now have someone probably trying to become president who has said that AP African American studies lacks education, who's using race and he's the modern day George Wallace. He's using race in the exact same way that we've seen from Jim Crow, from the South, redemption, lost cause bullshit, all the way up to the present.
Yes.
And now he's attacking universities, and he's using as a part of the culture wars. And here's what his lawyers say in this Stop Woke Act. There was an injunction against it. His lawyers would say that faculty are employees whose speech is governed by, so he's not even recognizing the First Amendment, much less academic freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, people, too many academics, too many people who are astonished by this, also thinks it's so ridiculous that it can't be taken seriously. Hello, I mean, yes, it has to be taken seriously because it's affecting our whole country, and it's so. This is why we wrote the book, was because we thought at least let academics clean up our own house. And there are two issues. I can't deal with Zuckerberg, or I don't know about free speech, right? Like I don't know about First Amendment. I can't go there. But at least let us like make sure that we're doing academically rigorous work that can be backed up. And what that would require is your peers, and not one DEI person, one vice provost, et cetera. That's what it was. So let's at least clean up our own. And I think, Johnny mentioned that in the 60s and, when Black studies departments in San Francisco State in the beginning, all of that has changed our universities and changed the scholarship too. And that's the integrity of knowledge is at stake here with what Ron DeSantis is doing. And this is what Bruce Gilley is doing. He's not part of the scholarly conversation around this. So it's a huge, one of the things I got involved with helping universities across the country to pass faculty senate resolutions at the very beginning of all this banning critical race theory stuff. And what was really interesting is the degree to which people would be like, oh, well, I don't have a dog in that fight, and because I don't do race stuff. And then they would be like, oh, but I'm a biologist.
Don't mean anything.
Oh my God.
What?
I do biology.
Well, no, but their idea was like, oh, but if they ban, I can't do my research at Planned Parenthood, or I do climate change. Like they started to realize, no, this is an attack on all of us.
Exactly.
All of us. And that was a pretty beautiful thing to see how that would in faculty senate conversations and stuff. So we are fundamentally against the state declaring anything. And there's a certain amount to which we are putting a lot of trust in our peers, which may or may not be warranted, right? I mean, some of our friends, when we would say like, we need academic freedom committees, and we need them for two things. We need them to hold someone like Gilley, who's going to weaponize academic freedom, accountable. We also need them for the contingent faculty who have no due process. So this is all of the faculty who are not tenured, which is now the majority of the faculty on campus, who can simply not be rehired on any pretext. So what's interesting about the Hamline case, the Muslim situation, what's interesting is that we know why she was not rehired. They could have kept it really quiet. One student complains. They could have kept it really quiet. And the chairperson could have said, we don't need your services next term. We're not doing that class. That happens all the time everywhere. What's interesting about this is that it actually rose to the situation where you could have this conversation about the relationship between DEI and academic freedom. So we said we need academic freedom so that if a contingent faculty member, someone without the privilege and protections of tenure, feels like they're non-renewal, because you don't even have to say you're firing it. You just say, we don't need your course next term, or whatever. So if contingent faculty or someone without tenure and the process protections does not get rehired and they believe that it was for political or economic donor or whatever reasons, there's a committee a standing Senate committee. We have standing Senate committees for all kinds of things. And some places do have academic freedom committees. Their charge isn't exactly this. Don't worry. So they can say, I think this was a violation of academic freedom. It wasn't the pretext and people will, it's complicated to figure out how these committees are going to work. And here's the thing, my co-author and I, we don't get to decide. It's the faculty senates on each campus that get to decide what this looks like. Does this look like a committee that does a bunch of things, and then when a case comes up, they find the right experts across the country to weigh in? Like it's not going to be like you find people with disciplinary expertise, and I would argue some degree of sensitivity to a multicultural, multiracial America. So DEI, I'm not anti-DEI. I'm not, but I don't like the way that it's taking place, and it's completely divorced from faculty, and that's not good for faculty, and it's not good for the DEI people either. It has to be integrated, and I am putting a lot of trust in faculty, but a lot of my trust comes from the fact that faculty don't look like they used to, and we have different departments now, and we have new bodies of knowledge, and to some degree, I might be naive because the Bruce Gillian and Peter Boghossian on my campus are not the norm, right? So the statement of censor, 2 to 1 in terms of support. So I could be naive, but the problem is there's no better alternative. We don't want Ron DeSantis. We don't want Marjorie Taylor Greene deciding these things. We don't want one DEI person who doesn't teach in a classroom and doesn't have experience in the discipline. We don't want one president who's worried about a donor. It's a democratic in a sense, right? Lateral peer review, where the faculty need to be in charge of the universities. And on a number of levels and around these kinds of cases, around academic freedom, absolutely they should be. And that's the argument. I'll leave it there.
Okay, I'm just going to have one question because I want to have time for everyone else to ask questions. So gauge that, answer it out however much of a length you want. I guess first a comment is just important for everyone to kind of keep in mind is that it's not a simple matter of choosing, I guess, racial justice versus academic freedom. I think we got arguments here from both that there's something actually really wrong with how universities are dealing with racial justice and DEI is that there's reasons not to be very happy with it. Putting that aside for now, that's just my comment. My question then for both of you is just, can you clarify, how would you characterize what's the positive goal of academic freedom? Because in reading both of your things, it didn't seem to be exactly the same. But Jennifer, you referred to kind of Robert Post, the democratic legitimacy.
Yes, that's why the First Amendment is
right. Okay.
Democratic competence is why academic freedom is different things.
Right. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. The democratic competence. Sorry. Right. Yeah. No, I got that wrong. Yeah. So that's one part. For Johnny, it's I got the sense it's much more about giving space for those few actual intellectuals, the ones that really are challenging power. Because it looks like if we read, my field, political science, international relations, it's hegemonic, it's conformist that, yeah, of course, the United States has a long history of striving for democracy, free markets, nothing in the empirical record can dispel that as a starting premise. I'm assigning the class again on that. And so that doesn't strike me as helping much for democratic competence. It seems very dangerous and incompetent. I'm more receptive to the idea of having a space for those few people in academia that really are challenging it, and that's what one wants from academic freedom. Though I realize then that means 98+% of academics. Well, I'm not in that camp. I'm not really actually doing any critical stuff. So with that said, can you sort of reiterate what you think is the ideal of academic freedom, and then Johnny give his take?
Sure. I mean, for me, it does fundamentally come down to freedom from external interference. And there's a number of different ways you can approach academic freedom. I mean, one of the questions is, does the university as a whole have academic freedom, or do individuals have it? And it's very complicated. And I think ultimately, it really is procedural. Academic freedom is procedural more than anything. It's about the due process. It's about being sort of evaluated, and the whole promotion and tenure stuff that happens for faculty, and too often now does not happen because you're just contingent faculty and you're paid a lot less, and you're term by term, and you never get integrated or pulled into the department conversation. So it's academic freedom for me is procedural in many respects. And it's about job security, which means it's about you cannot be fired easily. And so, mind you, I think that tenured faculty need to hold tenured faculty accountable, but I still think there's a very high bar for firing a tenured faculty. And I really want to see us renew the tenure line ranks. There should be, economic. It's freedom from interference from the state or the market is essentially my definition of it. Now, when you say then the university possesses it, it's a collective thing. I would then add it's a faculty collective thing. It's not a university administrator's decision, right? To say it's the faculty as a collective possesses academic freedom. There's something else though that I wanted to say. What was your, can you remind me how you put that?
Oh, yeah.
What is it for?
Well, that all sounds like the negative part about what we don't want people doing toward us. But I thought part of the democratic competency is the affirmative thing is somehow we'll actually be more informed citizens, which I'm not terribly impressed by, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, so,
I had Robert Post as a professor. He's a very good professor.
Okay.
Oh, I don't, that didn't help. Sorry.
So,
the value of academic freedom.
one thing I would say is that none of this happens without a struggle. It's not an academic exercise, and you can't just simply resolve the tension between justice and meaning. The title just doesn't, in some ways, just so oversimplified. There are a number of tensions, there are a number of competing goods, and it's a struggle. And I wouldn't have written this book with Michael the way that we did if Black Studies departments didn't yet exist. If we still were in a world, it's historically contextualized. If we were still in a world 60 years ago, or the world of the AAUP when it was white men who created AAUP, I wouldn't have written this book. But I have a certain faith that we've made enough inroads around what our we had that faith when we wrote well before Ron DeSantis and the more recent stuff about American exceptionalism is no longer a viable position for historians and political scientists, et cetera. We have too much information.
I don't think so, but go ahead, John.
Okay, so, but I also feel like we don't have any other option in terms of who gets to adjudicate these things. As far as positive goes, I think it's incredible. I mean, in some ways, the negative is the positive in the sense that having a space where you're protected from the immediate pressures of donors, students, et cetera, that's absolutely critical. And that's the space that has to continue to be protected. And that's the space that allows you to continue to push a field forward.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, DEI, someone asked, it stands for diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. Johnny? Yeah.
All right. There's a lot of things. While Jennifer was talking, I was thinking about a lot of things. And one of the first things is, before I answer the question, I give you a quote from one of my intellectual family members. In combating racism, we do not make progress by combating individuals, right? I think what we need is to think systemically in systems and institutions, and to realize that even with academic freedom, and we have our colleagues that are on these committees now, Trinity College has an academic freedom committee, which exonerated me, right? We worked through that first. But even with colleagues on that, they, as I said before, in a white supremacy society, the institutions will work to sustain and validate white supremacy. The university is not immune from that, right? So I don't put this kind of like procedural thing. I would just call it from where I'm standing, just looking at the world, because I'm a white supremacist scholar, is procedural racism happens constantly. You gave us examples of it when students had complaints about a faculty member and they're primarily Black, a woman, a Latino, something like that, right? So this proceduralism can be used in order to sustain this kind of stuff, right? Yeah. So the university itself, as I said, is an instrument of this. So when I think about tenure, not tenure, but academic freedom, I would rather to tear down this whole damn institution called the university and start anew. And tenure is in place because of capitalism and because of capitalists who don't like people going against the way they look at the world and the way they organize the world. We cannot have these institutions being controlled and directed by capitalists, right? That's one, right? You just can't have that. So what you're offering, from my perspective, having read your book too, is a Band-Aid. It's not going to really solve the problem because everybody's implicated in maintaining this system of oppression that is a beast. And right, what we need is something new. What that is, I don't know, but it's up to the people to decide what that may be. In the meantime, as Jonathan was saying, do I want a space? Yes, but I am like Gramsci. Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. I know damn well in these institutions that space will not be created because these institutions have been created. If you read Greg, Stephen Wilder's Ebony and Ivory, these institutions were created, right, to basically reshape Native Americans, indigenous people, into white people. And they were built by basically people who were slaving, right? These institutions are fundamentally messed up. We got to acknowledge that. Forget Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is just a little part of a picture of not only like extremism, but just everyday racism carried on by everyday people, right? We can call it liberal white supremacy if you want, right? And so for me, I go by the old African proverb, corn can't expect justice from a court composed of chickens, right? So I'm just not that stupid. I'm not that naive to believe that somehow even I, as a full professor, tenured, wasn't threatened with being fired from this university. I know damn well if they wanted to, they would have did it, right? So I have no confidence in academic freedom as currently constituted and operated because it is contingent. It is contingent on people going along to get along. And I don't want to do that. To advance knowledge, we must follow the facts. To advance life on the planet, we must do that. But we can't do that with these flawed kind of institutions, right? Even now at these major institutions, I know San Diego State probably doesn't recognize itself as being that in the state of California.
Sure we do.
Yeah, okay, all right, good, right? But say if you go to Berkeley, right? And if you go to Harvard, Stanford, guess who's on the faculty more than anybody else? Still white men, right? And that's where the knowledge comes from. That's the people who advise power in this society. Not folks at San Diego State, not folks at Trinity College, right? So we got to be concerned about that. So that's what I would say about it.
Okay, given time constraints, maybe we should hear comments, last questions from a few people and then get responses back, if that's okay.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay, so Fareed?
Yeah, thank you both. This is very thought-provoking. I'm wondering whether it would be useful to just remind ourselves of the distinction between the pursuit of truth, a truthful insight about the world, and the pursuit of a just world.
Mm.
And while these can coincide, they don't necessarily have to, and somehow we have to treat them maybe a little bit separately. So I think of the example of the Holocaust denier is somebody who you can talk about as making a truth claim that can't be vindicated, right? But the supporter of colonialism is somebody who might provide all the evidence and think, but I simply approve of it, right? I actually have worked on a historian who acknowledges some of the worst crimes to have been done in a particular history, but approves of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want him out of the academy.
Okay.
I just think he's a horrible person, but he really is a despicable human being. But his historical work is valuable. He has actually uncovered crimes that nobody before him had uncovered. So I don't know how we deal with that, right?
Thank you. Very relevant to the Nachbar, the next film. Okay, yeah, other comments, last questions? Yeah.
I'm familiar with the
Hmm.
and I am Native American, and I looked in this institution that's very focused on diversity and inclusion. But when you look at the department at SDSU for Natives, it's ran by a white man, and most of the professors are white. And you can take classes with the American Indian perspective, but then you have the professor thinking he knows more than your people. And it kind of feels like you don't have a voice over your own people. And my dad, he works in academics as well, and he actually was offered a position at UCLA. And in the Native department, and even though he had a tenure, he was still pushed out by white men because they felt like they had a voice over him. And I just definitely find it frustrating, even though we're focused on inclusion and want to make sure that every person of color, sexual orientation, whatever it may be, has a voice. This institution was never made for us. And being that I am an American, my tradition is oral tradition. We don't write things down, we listen, we really engage in conversation. That is not welcome for me here. I have to take notes. I have to really focus on tests. I have to, whatever the case may be. I think, in my perspective, that what you were saying was right. It's how do you, people are so focused on decolonizing schools and try to make it a place for everyone, but it was never made a place for everyone. It was made for white men who have money. And I wish I felt included in, I do feel included in this campus being here, but sometimes I feel hopeless that even though we're focusing on including people, we're focused on trying to make it more accessible, that this institution is just not safe. That's just my existence.
Yeah, respond.
Can we get one more or?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just-
Yeah. Let's see if there's one more question / comment. Okay, if not.
Actually,
Oh, yes, Ronnie.
You would
Point I
summarize,
made?
well, you would summarize both of your talks as being sort of in opposition to DEI work. And I would love to hear what you both, how you would, was that?
I was about to say that.
Yeah, I'm curious how you would articulate that and what it is about DEI work that you're setting up as the opposition to the kind of.
Diversity, equity, inclusiveness.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we got the three.
There's an article today that's in the Chronicle. You should go look at it. It's called Yes, DEI Erodes Academic Freedom. Yes, DEI Erodes Academic Freedom. It's a longer title, but it's in the Chronicle Higher Education. You should go look at that. DEI, as they say, it's DEI Incorporated. It's a business, right? It is a business designed to protect the institution. right? I gave you some of the language when I read the president's statement, right, that they use, right? And they talk about this language in their article too. DEI is about welcoming and stuff like that, but not in a way that transform the institution as it actually operates, right? So there's no structural transformation. There's only this kind of individual stuff that's going on. So they're trying to transform you and individuals and give you diversity training and all that stuff. They know damn well it don't work, right? But they don't care. It's the image of it all, right? We in the state of California, especially LA, it's all about image, right? No substance, right? But anyway, so something like but I'm just saying that's what it's doing, right? So I'm not really down with DEI. Some people call it dead end initiative.
Dead end initiative?
Yeah, dead end initiative. So I can see that. But let me give you this stuff, young sister. Is that you're here and you belong here and you can make this place yours. Don't see a damn thing to anybody, right? Do you. That's what you need to do with other people just like you.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Which is that use DEI if it helps you. Like I'm not as anti-DEI. I'm not pro-DEI. I'm not anti.
I didn't say no use it.
No, I know you, but I'm just saying there's channels, avenues right now, and there's different ones. There's the faculty kind of route. There's also a DEI kind of route, and there's resources there, and you should use them. And they actually can make some impact on how the university works. I mean, one of the things that I constantly go back to is when I was chair of the English department and DEI didn't exist. I'm ancient. This was, I don't know when this was. It was 2008. I don't even know. But so we had an ombudsman. We didn't have someone to do this kind of work around inclusivity, belonging. We also didn't have people investigated around anything. The chair was supposed to handle it. So I had a American Lit faculty who loved teaching Mark Twain and loved quoting from the book, repeatedly using the N-word to a point in which it just became not kind of cool. Mm-hmm. And I had an African-American woman come to me and say, there's something not right here. And I 100% with the way that he's doing it and the performance. I said that I 100% agree with you. I also had a faculty member who loved to teach Philip Roth. Fine. I love Philip. Well, I love some Philip Roth, but he loved to talk like Philip Roth in his comments on student papers in terms of like about blowjobs and things like this. God. So I thought I'm only 39 at the time, but I can deal with these faculty who are 10 years older than me, who are white, tenured senior, and I just gave them what for, and they both professed to completely understand. They didn't have to change a damn thing. Later, when I'd hear from students, I'd hear from other faculty, they didn't change any. I thought for sure that I had really reckoned with them. They did not change any of their behaviors. DEI on campus and these investigations, it's changing some behaviors. And I actually don't mind that, right? Like as a young woman who was hit on by her professors and who's constantly having her appearance discussed when I was an undergraduate, I don't mind that white men, or any man for that matter, any man has to think twice before they make comments about a young woman's appearance. And that is because of these investigations. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I'm not anti-DEI. I completely understand. The article that Johnny's referring to, I'm not crazy about these writers, Amna Khalid, Jeffrey Aaron Snyder, because they're like the mild liberal part, because they're not coming from where Johnny's coming from, I don't think. They're kind of like mild classic liberal, but they're riding this grifter train of talking about DEI. When you talk about DEI, you mean some very specific things, and you're about racial justice.
Yeah. And you call it racial justice. I'm just about anti-oppression. I don't want to be
anti-capitalism.
So there's there's buzzwords. It's become corporatized to some extent. But these people in this article, I don't disagree with the article. These things do come into conflict in all kinds of ways. I don't disagree with the basic premise. I don't like the way that they refer to, they're very dismissive about terms like white privilege, any of the terms that are now kind of associated with DEI corporatization. And frankly, that just sort of feeds in a kind of national narrative that thinks that it's racist to talk about white privilege. It's racist to white people, right? So they're sort of adopting a kind of language that I think feeds the campus reform. And I don't like that. I don't think that they're wrong, that there's a conflict that needs to be discussed, negotiated, but I think that conflict is between faculty involvement in the governance of DEI, faculty taking some responsibility for it, versus having two tracks where you have a group of people who are paid by administrators. Johnny's right. The DEI people are not hired by faculty and do not have tenure. They're hired by the top management. And so they're very liability averse. They can be fired by top management.
Exactly.
So they don't have the protections to say what they really think about stuff. Ultimately, that's why the double standard on my campus. That's why the double standard, because of fear of lawsuit. So, but right now, these things are happening on two different tracks, and they need to be integrated for either to be effective. For faculty to take some responsibility for this work, and for DEI people to be able to actually weigh in rather than have to first to confer with the provost or the vice provost before they weigh in.
Well, just so you know, you all, if you want to read what I really think about DEI, you can go to a chapter in this book called Protecting Whiteness. I think it's what it's called. Yeah, Protecting Whiteness. And my piece is called The Unblackening. Right? And in there, I don't use the word privilege, but I use something called white license, which I think is more systemic and structural to get you to understand what that is, actually. So, but you can find out my statements about, I call it exclusive inclusive. We're going to include you, but exclude you at the same time. So that's DEI for me.
Okay, I had a lot of other questions that I can't get to, although I'll get to still talk to the speakers later, so I may get to ask them later. I suspect a lot of you would like to know much more about this, but if nothing else, we got a sense that we're in need of a lot more critical scrutiny of both these terms, academic freedom, racial justice. And it's not as simple as tension between them, as they both really have to be critically interrogated. So I thank everyone for coming here to this event. And in a way, this is just a tease, and hopefully we will all read more, including Johnny's chapter. This book by Jennifer Ruth and her next book, and lots of other things going on. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Oh, we spoke here last night, yeah.
Valerie Johnson, who's actually interim vice provost for DEI at DePaul, but she's
Yeah.
Okay. The three of us are crediting a book about all of this legislation bullshit. And it's going to be that's all. And so it's we have a bunch of different contributors.
Thank you very much. Remember the 5 o'clock screening for those of you.